Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joanne and I'm a researcher at the Open University. Today I'll be telling you about the work that my colleague Lorna Rouse and I have done as part of the DAPL project. So what was our work about? Well, we wanted to find out how the palliative and end-of-life care needs of people with learning disabilities are being met. We had 3 questions. Question 1, how do staff identify these needs? Question 2, how do staff assess and meet these needs? And question 3, how are services coordinated and staff trained to meet these needs? To answer our questions, we searched for information. We did this using what is called a rapid review. This means that the search tried to find the information from many different places, for example, books, journals, and the internet. But we could not search everywhere because our search was being done quite quickly. The information we looked for could come from anywhere in the world, any time from 2007. From our search, we found a lot of information that looked like it could help answer our questions. We read this information and made decisions about what helped answer our questions. To do that, we had to do a lot of reading and had many discussions to make sure we included everything that was useful. For question 1, we found 42 examples of information that helped answer this question. Mostly the information is for people with learning disabilities. It gives them advice on thinking about and writing down what they would like to happen at the end of their lives in a plan. The plan can then be shared with the people who can help make sure that their wishes happen, e.g. staff who care for them and their family and friends. There were many different examples of plans, but all shared some important things. For example, what should be included in a plan? And the ideas for things that could be included in a plan were things like what people with learning disabilities would like at the end of their lives in terms of care, what they would like to happen to their possessions, and what they would like to happen at their funerals. It also included advice about who can help to make a plan, and usually that was carers as well as family and friends. And those carers and family can then help people to think about what they want when they're thinking about their end of life wishes, and to perhaps provide some more information if needed. Some of the information that we found for question 1 was for carers, and it was 2 types of information that we found. Firstly, advice on helping someone with a learning disability to make a plan. The second type of advice that we found for carers was how to identify that someone with a learning disability may need palliative and end-of-life care. And that included ideas on things like how important it is to identify needs early so that good care can be provided. It also included tools to help identify that people need end-of-life care. And one of the most common is the surprise question. And the surprise question is simply where a carer may ask themselves, would I be surprised if this person died within the next 12 months? It also stressed that all staff can help identify that a person needs end-of-life care, that it's not just the responsibility of, for example, doctors and nurses, that social workers can be involved as well as family. And finally, it stressed how important it is to share information so that care can be coordinated. So once a person is identified as needing end-of-life care, then people should be brought together to plan how that should happen, and it needs all services to be involved in that planning. Now I'm going to go on to how the information we found for questions 2 and 3, but before I do that, I want to quickly explain some of the shorthand letters in the next few slides. The first one is CPR, which stands for cardiopulmonary resuscitation, and that simply means when somebody's heart may have stopped beating, people might try to start it beating again. The second one is the Disability Distress Assessment Tool, which is a tool that can help carers to identify when a person is in distress. The third is POLE or POLE, which is another tool called the Probability of Life Expectancy. And that's a tool that can help carers to identify the stage of life that somebody is at, and therefore they can provide care that is appropriate to that stage. And finally, GSF stands for Gold Standards Framework, which is a set of advice about how you can provide high quality end-of-life care, the standards that need to be met across many different settings of care. So what did we find for question 2? Well, we found 38 examples of information that helped answer this question. Most of the information was guidance for how needs may be assessed and met, rather than examples of how needs are currently being assessed and met. We found a small number of examples of how needs are currently being assessed and met. All of them stress the need for collaboration. For example, they all involved palliative care experts supporting others, for example, learning disability staff to provide care, as well as providing care themselves directly to the person. They stressed the need for holistic care. So in the examples, holistic care was being provided, meaning that the care that was being provided took care of all sorts of needs and not just clinical needs. It was also addressing social needs. The examples were also using tools to be used for assessing and meeting needs. And this included, for example, development of action plans. And those action plans would set out the care that a person needed and how that care was going to be provided. And it might include things such as a CPR decision. So going back to what I was saying earlier, if a person's heart was to stop beating, should a decision be made to restart that heart or not? DISTAT is a tool which can be used to assess people's needs and on the basis of that assessment, how distressed they are, provide care. There was also examples of very careful record keeping, for example, hydration charts, so that carers would keep a close note on how much fluid a person was getting into their bodies and probably take measures to increase that intake if needed. And finally, those examples would have what's called just-in-case medicine boxes, and that would be a box in which medicines were kept only to be used in certain circumstances. For example, should a person develop a lot of pain, and therefore these medicines could be used to reduce that pain. We found many more examples of guidance that tells staff how they should assess and meet needs. All of this guidance stresses certain things. For example, it stressed that palliative care and learning disability staff work and learn together. It stressed the need to provide holistic care, taking care of all sorts of needs. It stressed the need to use specific tools and approaches for assessment and specific tools and approaches for meeting needs. It gave a lot of advice on how to manage symptoms such as pain or nausea or breathlessness. And finally, there was a lot of advice on how to make sure that good communication is being made, not just between carers and different services, but with the person themselves as well as their family and friends. So for question 3, how are services coordinated and staff trained? We found 25 examples of information that helped answer this question. And again, there was more information that was guidance instead of examples of what is being done, and there was more information on care coordination than on staff training. As far as staff training is concerned, we find examples of 3 different types of information. We find online training, we find training for staff working in services, and we find guidance on what should be included in training. Together, all of that information shows the importance of training on good communication and on different types of care, going back to this idea of the need for holistic care. And it also shows the importance of joint training, where different types of carers come together to learn. In terms of how services are coordinated, we find a small number of examples. All of those examples involve collaboration between services and between services and other organisations and people, such as family. Coordinated services have clear steps for how services should be provided. For example, there were a couple of examples where a pathway would be set out that would set out the care that a person was to receive from the minute that it was identified they needed end-of-life care to the time when they died. Some of the examples also have clear actions for how these steps should happen. So, for example, where the advice would be that good records should be kept and shared amongst carers, some of the advice said how those records should be kept and how they should be shared. And just to back that up, many of the examples showed the keeping of very accurate and regular information and the sharing of this information with different carers, including family. The examples we find of guidance on how services should be coordinated all stress the importance of collaboration between services, primarily clinical services and social services, that any collaboration must be based on mutual trust and respect. Carers all have to trust and respect one another and what they do. That there is a need to involve advocacy groups and independent mental capacity advocates, or IMCAs, at certain times where, for example, a person with a learning disability does not have family to speak up for them or may not be able to communicate their needs in ways that carers can easily understand. It also emphasises the need for accurate recording and sharing of information, and many times that advice focuses on sharing of information electronically. And it also emphasises the need to involve family. And I think you'd be able to note that much of the advice that is given is reflected in how care is actually provided in the few examples that we found of care coordination. So what have we found overall from our work? Well, we have found that there are examples of good care and services, but we find it very hard to find them. By the end, we had found out a lot about what services should be doing, but only a little about what they are actually doing. So we'd found a lot of guidance, but not an awful lot of examples of practice. And this makes it hard to know what services are doing to meet the palliative and end-of-life care needs of people with learning disabilities. Very few of the examples of what was being done, in other words, the practical examples, were tested. So we don't know a lot about what works well and what doesn't work so well. Bringing all that learning together, it's clear that we need services to make their work known, for example, written up in reports or published in journals. It has to get out there, so to speak, so that we can find out about it and learn from it. That will help others to provide good care and for us all to learn together. That's me. That's a very quick run through of what we find. I hope it's given you a good idea of the sorts of information that's out there. Thank you very much for listening, and if anybody would like to ask questions, please do so later. Thank you very much.